All right, welcome to another episode of the Political Playbook. I'm Wyatt, and this is my co-host Darren. So we're gonna go ahead and kick it right off for you. So we've got to start here, and Darren. So the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in favor of the Trump administration, and they did not rule on the constitutionality of the ending of birthright citizenship, which was the whole executive order. They actually just ruled on the constitutionality of nationwide injunctions, which they ultimately ruled were unconstitutional. So, did I miss anything there? Do you want to go ahead and give your take? Like, what do you think of this? This is nuts to me, frankly. This is absolutely nuts.
22 states and immigrant rights groups challenged the executive order. They said it violates the 14th Amendment. A bunch of federal district courts just issued nationwide injunctions to block it. But the Supreme Court ruled that federal judges likely exceed their authority by issuing nationwide injunctions like this. And so this ruling allows the executive order to take effect in a patchwork of states with I guess a delay of about 30 days. It'll take effect in about 30 days in the 28 states that did not challenge it. And like you said, the Supreme Court did not rule on the constitutionality of the executive order itself. And on the subject of the constitutionality of it, I did copy the 14th Amendment. I guess you would call it the citizenship clause. I'll read it off real quick. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. This was originally intended for slaves or the descendants of slaves, and when they were freed, this is kind of how they dealt with that issue. It granted them citizenship. This is kind of anomalous throughout the globe. It's more common in the Western Hemisphere where it's all like post-colonial powers or you know nations like that. So the laws are a bit different. But in the old world, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, typically to be a citizen, you have to be a descendant of another citizen. That's typically how citizenship is conferred. So, countries like ours, which just grant automatic birthright citizenship, are actually in the minority. I don't really interpret the Constitution. I mean, it's hard to interpret the Constitution any other way than what has been the precedent. Like it seems pretty explicit and straightforward, even if the intent was not for a million, you know, Central American illegals to come in and have birth and then their children become citizens. That was not explicitly laid out. So there's I guess there's
Gee, I
definitely
wonder
room for
why.
well, I think back then I don't think for one I don't think they could quite predict it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there was no radical introduction of immigrants in the 19th century. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that didn't happen.
Well, those were all
That's
like
not where the term melting
Italian.
pot comes from, right? That's not where that comes from. That's no, that's postmodern terminology. Yeah. That's
Oh,
y
okay, yeah, we're gonna act like Ben Franklin would be stoked to see a bunch of Italians coming
Ben
in.
Fr- Ben Franklin was not there for the passing of the 14th Amendment. All right? Like if
I know. I'm just thinking of what the founders. Yeah, I
no,
know.
this
It
is
was
what why? Under what circumstance? This is post founders,
well,
obviously, right?
yeah, it was 1866, so this
It's
is a long time.
constitutionally ratified. You know what I mean? Like you can't just ignore that. And the idea that this was meant solely for slaves is just ludicrous. They made this with immigrants in mind. They affirmed it like less than 30 years after they ratified the 14th Amendment. There was a Chinese American, and he sued the government for his citizenship, and the government made it very clear this applies to immigrants. How
Less
could it?
than 30
How could
years.
it
Oh,
not?
30 years is a long time. 30 years is a long time. I mean 1866, we're talking right after the Civil War.
Right. So you're talking less than a
So
generation.
that was what was on the mind at the time. So
Listen,
it's
I'm
obviously
not gonna
referring to that.
I'm not gonna deny the fact that this was mostly meant for the descendants of slaves to have citizenship. Okay. But it also there was a huge demographic of immigrants in this country in the North, right? Irish people. As a matter of fact, in the 1860s, there was like draft riots from Irish immigrants. Like the idea that immigrants weren't here and this didn't apply to them is just lunacy. It applied to the Chinese immigrants building the railroads. You know, their descendants were national or naturalized. I mean, this idea that this birthright citizenship only applied to slaves is just not true. As a matter of fact, it
Well, I
applies
didn't
to
say it
every
only
single
applied.
person. It applies to every single person.
I didn't say it only applied. I'm just saying look at the intent. I mean, look at the date. So it was obviously meant for descendants of slaves, and then there were the side effects. But obviously this, I mean, ultimately though, the intent doesn't really matter because we're in the situation we are now. How are we going to remedy it? I think we're headed in the right direction on this one. I think the idea that,
How?
somebody, well, people do like birth tourism, people will come from other countries and, expecting mothers like 8 months in, and they'll come over, they'll have a baby on the US, and then, they have an anchor baby, and then that baby has US citizenship, and, people have exploited the system. So I'm
I
all
mean, listen,
for
I
limiting.
don't deny that, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a constitutional amendment, Darren. It's just as unbreaking as the First Amendment, as the Second Amendment, as it's just as important as the rest of the Constitution. There's no amount of executive orders. The idea that you're going to executive order your way out of a constitutional amendment is crazy.
Well, look, obviously, like when I read it how it's been interpreted, right? I mean, it's really hard to interpret any other way. But here's the thing, though. Ultimately, if the Supreme Court interprets it another way, then I mean, that's all the power you need to change it,
And you're telling me that even this Supreme Court, as crazy as they are, they're gonna change the fact that it says all persons born or naturalized to, oh, actually all descendants of citizens. Like there is no reading around that. You know what I mean? And here's the thing, there's also no precedent for it either. So it's not like they're gonna be able to lean back on something and be like, actually this was the right decision. They'd have to have a whole new set of legal doctrine, which I'm not saying that they're opposed to that, but I'm just saying that you're essentially undoing an entire amendment to the Constitution. That you cannot create a higher barrier to be a constitutional amendment, right? And this got there. And the idea that it's just going to be overruled by an interpretation of six justices is nuts. That's why
Well,
they
look,
didn't rule on it, is because they knew that they can't rule for it.
yeah, there's no reading around it, honestly. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they could get away with it. I'd like to see them try, and that'd be that'd be interesting at the very least. I don't know that. I don't think six would sign on. I think maybe one or two. You know, I'm thinking like Clarence Thomas might. I'm iffy if any others. Maybe, yeah, really only him. I don't know. I
Well, here's
definitely
the
don't
thing.
think you.
Like that, so they chose not to rule on the constitutionality of the executive order, right? And they did that for a reason, like you and I are thinking. But that lawsuit is going to, I mean, the executive order is still going to be upheld for potentially several months. I mean, the only people that could put a pause on it now would be the Supreme Court. So I don't know what they're gonna do because this thing's going up to the Supreme Court. Like, there's no the lawsuits are gonna go. It may take a year, but who knows, right? But I'm just not comfortable really with the the president trying to override basically an entire amendment to the Constitution via executive order. Like that's insane.
I don't really mind it so much because it serves my interests, but
You're just skeptical on how much it'll work.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, ultimately, when they rule on the real issue and not just the executive order issue, then I think likely they won't rule in his favor. I mean, these justices have proven they're not uh, in the cult. I mean, they'll rule against him. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that's fair. I mean, well, yeah. I mean, I sort of agree. I mean they're still conservative, right? But they are not like undyingly loyal to Trump. That's the way it seems.
Yeah,
Um,
but we talked about okay. We talked about there's kind of two different things. We talked about the constitutionality of the real issue behind it, but let's kind of talk more about like the ability of these like district court judges to override an executive order. To me, that seems a little ludicrous because if any federal judge, you know, even these like really low ranking ones can just essentially overturn an executive order, then the executive really doesn't have that much power if he can just be if his agenda can just be upended like this. And this was actually a problem that Biden faced as well
oh,
during
absolutely.
his term. So it's certainly a bipartisan issue. I so in that sense, I'm all for this executive order. I would prefer a stronger executive and frankly, even when Biden was in power, I think it probably would have been to my advantage if more of his agenda was allowed. In those terms, I'm all for the executive order in both regards, but in this sense, I think they made the correct decision. I don't think the executive should be bogged down by these these district court judges.
Well, see, I'm totally against what Steve Bannon and these big academics call, unitary executive theory, right? I'm in huge opposition to that. All right, I think it's ludicrous that this idea that we have three co-equal branches of government, right? I mean, it's clearly explained, right? And we're gonna circumvent two-thirds of that to one person, not even the representatives, not even the interpreters of the law. We're gonna circumvent it into one person. Okay, that to me sounds ludicrous. That's a step towards autocracy, and I'm just not a fan typically. Now that being said, I don't want to override like a mandate. Like, for example, like Obama had a pretty clear mandate, right? So in terms of these specifically in terms of these nationwide injunctions, though, I do find it kind of silly the idea that like just a single district court can roadblock an entire agenda, right? For years, right? Because I mean, what's Trump's most like lethal weapon against him right now? It's time. He's a 4 year, or I guess now it's 3.5 years, right? And let's be
Oh
real
yeah,
here.
we're already in July tomorrow, so.
Yeah, and I mean, let's just call a spade here. I mean, this dude really only has 18 months of legislative presidency left. After the midterms, I'm sure he's going to lose at least the House. I mean, is he going to be able to pass anything? So it's pretty much just going to be whatever he can do by himself. So I think this idea that, one district court can just block everything. Now, I do have to concede, though, that that is the precedent, right? Despite how silly I find it, I still do consider it the precedent. I mean, you got to think this goes all the way back to DACA, right? Under Obama, it's usually meant to stop Democrats. Biden did, student debt relief. That was stopped by a nationwide injunction. Biden did vaccine mandates under OSHA. That was stopped by a nationwide injunction. He tried to eliminate Title 42, the border security one during COVID. That was stopped by a nationwide injunction. So, like, this idea is pretty, like, set in stone. And all of those got upheld by the Supreme Court as totally, like, sound legal doctrine. And then now they're like, oh, actually, the whole time it's been unconstitutional. I think that that's a little fucked up, but that's politics.
Oh yeah, I mean that's part of the game, I suppose. I mean, I wish Biden was able to enact some student debt relief. That would have certainly helped me out. So yeah, I mean, in that sense, I was kind of, I mean, I recall being mad at the Supreme Court and the district courts that initially blocked him back during his presidency. So I think I've been fairly consistent in this regard that I do think these lower level judges have too much power. If the Supreme Court wants to overrule something the president does, on one hand, like I would like to make a shift towards autocracy. On the other hand, I can live with that because to me that seems like equality. If this, I feel like if the Supreme Court can overrule the president, that's fine. But it doesn't. It seems like tyranny when a federal court judge, like a low level one, can overrule a president. That just doesn't seem right
Right,
to me at all.
and especially like you got to think most of these federal court judges, even these lower level ones, they may have been nominated 20 fucking years ago, right? They're not at all, like when you're selecting a judge, you're somewhat the current selections are somewhat in tune with the current political agenda. So for example, like the judges that Trump nominates this year are going to be consistent with the Trump agenda, right? But whenever you go
Oh
back
yeah.
to a guy 20 years ago, at this point you're almost let's say a little bit over 20 years ago, so that way I can go to like Clinton, right? The politics and the political philosophy of the Clinton administration is nowhere even comparable with the politics of today, right? So I do see what you're saying, how it seems literally like tyranny, even though it's a check, right? Um, and I'm not saying that there's not soundness in your argument, but I would just say that generally I'm okay with because the, I mean, I don't know, it gridlocks progress whenever you allow these nationwide injunctions, but it also does seem to help us out a little bit so that way no one does crazy shit. So there might be a happy medium. Maybe they can just pause, but like you had these district judges, Darren, that were literally like, no, 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 no. You have to go back. You have to undeport these illegal immigrants. You have to undeport them, bring them back, give them due process, and then you can deport them. And I'm like, how does a district judge have that level of authority? That seems nuts.
Well, and it seems like their power isn't even being erased necessarily. It's just the threshold is higher. So, uh, I guess the scope has been narrowed. So, where these nationwide injunctions imposed by judges only apply to states,
Yeah, but
groups like class action lawsuits, and then individuals that sued. So it's not like their power has been totally stripped. It's just they don't have this far-reaching, overbearing power almost
right, because I
anymore.
mean, there for a while, and not just in this instance, I would argue that for the student loan relief, right, and everything, DACA, right. It almost seemed like every single district court judge could pretend to basically pause an executive order or pause. He would have as much power as the Supreme Court for essentially a year and a half while the Supreme Court takes its time reading on what they're going to do. And that's how is that democracy? Someone explain that to me. And God, that's gonna get some hate on left wing Twitter. But it's I just feel like that's so obvious to everyone that a district judge should not have as much power as the president of the United States. Are you out of your mind?
Oh yeah, yeah. I see both sides because I mean, there's give and take. Obviously, if we, I mean, with Trump, it is dangerous, I guess, because he's so off his rocker at times. But on the other hand, once a more sane person gets in the office, I don't want them to be, bogged down by all this. So,
Well,
uh,
the
I,
to steel man it, right? I mean, like we both agree, there is no reading out the birthright citizenship, right? There's no. So let me just do a complete hypothetical for you here. Let's say, you know, a Democratic president gets in and he passes an executive order that bans private gun sales, right? I mean, that's clearly unconstitutional, right? I mean, that violates probably 1,000 laws in the United States regarding
mhm.
commerce and the rights of gun owners and stuff, right? Um, Essentially, without nationwide injunctions, you'd have a scenario where blue states get to have like a ban on firearm sales, and red states get to keep it until the Supreme Court decides to weigh in, if they decide to weigh in. And how is that fair, right? You're almost going to have 50 different states and not one United States.
Oh yeah. I mean, on one hand, I guess it's kind of the way you laid that out. You could kind of see a timeline in which there's almost like a shift towards confederacy rather than like the more union type model, federalist type model. Confederacy being just like a bunch of states, but the laws are more patchwork,
Right. So typically in a confederacy, the rights of the state will trump the rights of the federal. So if Texas says we want to keep private gun sales and the Fed says private gun sales are illegal, then the deference has to go to the state of Texas. Just as an example.
Oh yeah, and
And
ultimately,
that
I
clearly
don't
is
think
bad,
that's.
right? I mean, we tried that before. That's bad. And I don't think this is moving us in that direction completely, but it's definitely like that direction, you know?
Oh yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't think that that is workable at all. So, in that sense, I don't want to. I don't want us to move in that direction. Ultimately, I hope that this gets seized upon and it moves us almost in a more united direction, one in which the executive can just enact his agenda more efficiently. But I do see your point, and history played out the way it did for a reason. I mean, we only operated under the Articles of Confederation for like okay, my history. It's been a while. Like I want to say a few decades, right? Or was it even less than
Oh, no,
that?
I don't even know if we didn't even make it a decade. I don't know if we made
We,
it 3. I don't even know if we made it 5 years.
you know what? That sounds right. That maybe I'm turning 3 years into 3 decades.
8
I
years is
hate to
what Google says.
8 years.
8
Okay,
years.
okay. So I overestimate it. So it didn't even last that long. So
Yeah, that
I
was
mean,
our first form of American government actually, folks.
I agree with the executive order, but I do see the other side. And but you kind of take a bit of the opposite approach, but you do see the argument.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have, if anything, I would have just heightened the court that had this power. I would have heightened it to the Circuit Court of Appeals. But I wouldn't have I wouldn't have taken it away. I don't know. I just would have been a little bit more consistent. Like either they do have the power or they don't. Either, so like this whole state by state thing, I think is only going to breed more chaos. And but that is what we're doing. So that'll be interesting.